I've navigated the labyrinthine world of corporate malfeasance, brokered resolutions for multi-billion-dollar conflicts, and encountered every shade of deceit imaginable. Yet nothing could have truly prepared me for a 320-mile drive to my father's ancestral farm, only to be confronted by two overzealous security personnel who blocked the access road, gesturing towards a hastily erected gate they'd unlawfully placed on my family's estate, and unequivocally stating, "You are forbidden from entering." That was the precise moment when my carefully cultivated composure shattered and my ingrained legal acumen surged to the forefront. It was far too early. My internal clock typically doesn't permit consciousness before 7 in the morning, but that particular dawn, my eyes snapped open with the startling abruptness of a sudden detonation long before the first hint of daylight. A profound sense of unease, a palpable wrongness, permeated my being. It wasn't a phantom from a nightmare, nor the gnawing anxiety of everyday stress. It was something tangible, something lurking, waiting. The sterile, climate-controlled ambience of my upscale apartment in downtown Chicago, situated 30 stories above the urban cacophony, served as a stark reminder of the life I had meticulously constructed. A life dominated by the crisp austerity of tailored suits worn more frequently than I ever breathed fresh air. Yet my thoughts had been consumed by dreams of my father, and he, in reality or in my subconscious, never made quiet entrances. In the dream, he stood with his characteristic stubborn defiance, arms rigidly crossed, projecting a silence that bore the weight of an unspoken, profound anguish. I sat up, my hands instinctively going to my face, allowing the lingering darkness to envelop me. Then, my mobile device vibrated insistently. An unknown sender, 3 missed calls, another buzz. I answered, anticipating a late-night client from the Eastern time zone or a routine work-related call. "Hello," I managed. A woman's voice, remarkably steady despite an undercurrent of tremor, responded, "Is this Mr. Carter? Samuel Carter? Son of Robert Carter?" My spine snapped to attention. "Yes," I confirmed. "Who is this?" "This is St. Luke's General Hospital," she replied. "Your father was admitted early this morning. He's in critical condition. We believe he suffered a myocardial infarction. He is currently unresponsive." For a moment I remained speechless, not from a lack of concern, but from a profound disorientation, struggling to process the expected emotional response. It had been 3 years since my father and I last spoke, a conversation that culminated in his declaration that I was no longer his son, that I had renounced the land, the name, and the very bloodline that connected us before abruptly severing the call. However, the disembodied voice of a stranger relaying the potential end of his life struck me with the force of a physical blow. The nurse's tone softened. "Do you have any other next of kin we should contact?" "No, just me," I stated, my voice betraying a steadiness I did not feel. "Text me the address. I'm on my way." I terminated the call and moved with an urgency that preceded conscious thought. I shed my silk sleepwear, donned the stiffest denim I possessed, grabbed my well-worn boots, and retrieved the emergency preparedness kit I hadn't accessed in years, a hybrid of survival gear and an unplanned contingency. The transformation was instantaneous. From corporate attorney to a son answering a desperate summons. By the time the first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I was already navigating the interstate, heading westward. My Tesla, a silent phantom, glided through the pre-dawn gloom. No music, no podcasts, not even the ambient hum of the news. Only the low thrum of tires on asphalt and a silence so profound it felt like an inescapable presence. My thoughts gravitated to the man awaiting me at the end of the highway, assuming he was still among the living. My father embodied a generation that measured a life's worth in acreage, not in fleeting hours. He waged unyielding battles against every developer, every zoning commission, every state inspector who dared set foot upon his domain. 5,000 acres, a solitary canine companion, a single hunting rifle, and an ingrained animosity towards anyone adorned with a clipboard. And me? I had spent my formative years actively seeking to create a chasm between us, a chasm of legal standing, emotional distance, any barrier I could erect. Somewhere beyond Rockford, my hand reached for my phone, and I composed a message to the one individual who would comprehend the gnawing apprehension settling in my stomach. Me. Heading back to the farm. Something feels off. Heard Greenhaven HOA has been acquiring land around town. Check if that name has crossed your desk. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a reply. Leo, the FBI typically doesn't concern itself with HOA squabbles, but I'll look into it. Let me know if anything smells like fraud. I placed the phone back in its cradle, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and fixed my gaze on the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching towards a past I had desperately tried to enter. At the time, I believed the gravest peril awaiting me was a dying father and the lingering specter of years of unresolved animosity. I was profoundly mistaken. I had erroneously assumed I was racing against the inevitability of mortality. I had no inkling I was hurtling headlong into open warfare. The further I journeyed from the urban sprawl of Chicago, the more the surrounding landscape underwent a visible transformation. Gleaming steel and glass receded, giving way to weathered barns, expansive skies, and the quiet, unpretentious vastness of the Midwest, a region that demanded respect without ever seeking ostentation. It was a tableau I had spent half my life actively fleeing, yet with each passing mile, a palpable weight seemed to settle upon me. The Tesla continued its silent ballet across the deserted highway, its nearly imperceptible hum almost unsettling. Such profound quietude invariably leaves an unsettling abundance of space for recollection. My mind drifted back to my father, Robert Carter, a man seemingly sculpted from the very earth and sweat of his domain, possessed of a tenacious pride that could either forge an enduring legacy or consume it entirely. He held a fervent belief in two fundamental tenets: the land and the lineage it sustained. The land invariably took precedence, always. As a child, this singular devotion eluded me. 5,000 acres felt less like a birthright and more like an immutable, endless prison. While he diligently imparted lessons on tractor repair and hay baling, my deepest yearning was for escape, for books, for distant cities, for any challenge that didn't carry the pungent aroma of manure. I vividly recall being 12 years old, perched on a fence rail, observing him diagnose a malfunctioning water line. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, glanced in my direction, and declared, "The land never abandons you, son. It's people who leave." In my youthful ignorance, I failed to grasp that his words were a desperate plea for me to remain, to resist becoming one of those who departed. Yet depart I did, and with a decisive finality. At 18, I crammed my meager possessions into a dilapidated Ford and drove away, never once looking back. Law school, internships, climbing the corporate ladder, anything that would maintain an insurmountable distance from this place. He labeled me a traitor. I dismissed him as an anachronism. Neither of us ever offered an apology. When my mother passed, he withheld the news for weeks, by which time the funeral rites had long concluded. His justification was that it would have been an unacceptable disruption to my professional engagements. That moment marked an irreparable fracture in the bond between us. The ensuing years became attenuated, characterized by the occasional holiday card or a perfunctory voicemail, but never a genuine conversation until this unforeseen juncture. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What could possibly have driven him to such a state that he collapsed outside a liquor store, a man who had abstained from alcohol for 3 decades? What immense pressure? What existential threat? What burden could possibly buckle a man of his fortitude? Approximately 4 hours into my journey, my phone chimed on the console, a message from Leo. "Leo, Greenhaven HOA secured permits last year. Significant expansion, discreet, highly private. Suspiciously so. I'll investigate further." I stared at the words, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. Greenhaven. I had encountered the name peripherally, mentioned in casual conversation by clients, colleagues, and locals, lamenting the burgeoning power of HOAs, transforming into quasi-governmental entities with unchecked authority. But this transcended a mere suburban territorial dispute. This pertained to my father's land, a place he would defend with his life. Why would an HOA be involved in such a remote locale? The miles continued to blur. I crossed the state line, observing the terrain flatten into an endless expanse of open fields, punctuated by the rhythmic sweep of windmills casting fleeting shadows. The sky deepened to a sapphire hue, the kind of expansive azure that is exclusively visible in the heartland, where the horizon appears to hold its breath. As the sun began its descent, memories flooded my consciousness with increasing velocity. My father, his voice raised in righteous anger, confronting a developer who had attempted to surreptitiously deploy a survey crew onto his property. My father, rifle in hand, confronting county zoning officials who had disregarded his grievances regarding a construction rig positioned perilously close to the property line. My father, his voice low and steady, confiding that the land was all that remained for him after my mother's passing. I had once interpreted this as a manipulative attempt to instill guilt. Now I questioned if he had been speaking a profound truth. As I navigated the final stretch of highway towards the vicinity of our former residence, the atmosphere grew perceptibly heavier, as if the years of my absence were poised roadside, arms crossed, demanding an explanation. I decelerated as familiar landmarks began to materialize: the weathered "Welcome to Fairview County" sign, the derelict gas station, the diner with its perpetually flickering "open" sign, a fixture likely since the Clinton administration. Everything seemed diminished. Or perhaps I had simply outgrown my ability to recognize it. I drew a slow, deliberate breath. The farm lay another 20 minutes distant, accessible via a winding back road. But before I could confront that hallowed ground, another obligation beckoned. My father, whether alive or on the precipice of demise, awaited. I veered off the highway, setting a course for St. Luke's General Hospital. Whatever lay within those walls, I was ill-prepared to face it. But time had run out. St. Luke's General Hospital stood at the periphery of town like a weary sentinel, a squat utilitarian structure bearing the marks of countless summers and insufficient maintenance. The asphalt of the parking lot was fractured, the building's facade chipped and peeling, and the automatic doors groaned with a sound akin to a final exhalation. It bore no resemblance to a place where one might recover from a severe cardiac event, yet it was the sole medical facility within a 50-mile radius. I parked near the entrance, took a deep, fortifying breath, and exited the vehicle. The olfactory assault was immediate: a pungent blend of disinfectant, aged carpeting, and a faint metallic tang that evoked memories of arduous nights spent in law school libraries. Inside, the receptionist, peering over her spectacles, inquired, "Are you here for someone?" "Robert Carter," I replied, the words feeling strangely foreign on my tongue. Her demeanor shifted instantly, her expression softening with a mixture of sympathy and something more somber. "Room 215, ICU wing. You'll need to sanitize your hands and obtain a visitor's badge." I nodded, complied with her instructions, and followed her directions down a narrow corridor illuminated by the erratic flicker of fluorescent tubes emitting a low buzz like agitated insects. The sound reverberated off the tiled walls, filling the oppressive silence with an unsettling hollowness. Room 215 was situated midway down the right side of the corridor. I paused in the doorway, utterly unprepared for the sight of my father, the man who had once effortlessly hoisted tractor engines as if they were mere grocery bags, now lying frail and motionless beneath the thin hospital linens. His complexion was pallid, his hair noticeably grayer than I remembered. A delicate oxygen tube snaked beneath his nostrils, and an array of wires crisscrossed his chest, tethering him to machines that emitted slow, steady beeps. Too steady, perhaps, like a clock, uncertain of its purpose. For a protracted moment, I was immobilized, my gaze fixed on the man who had taught me the art of stacking hay, the intricacies of plumbing repair, the precise arc of a hammer swing. The same man I had vehemently argued with, the same man who had retaliated with equal fervor, the same man I had so decisively walked away from. I stepped across the threshold. "Hey," I whispered, fully aware he could not hear me. "It's me." My voice cracked, an embarrassing display of vulnerability, yet in that moment there was no one else present to witness it. I pulled a chair closer to the bedside and sat down. The rhythmic pulsing on the monitor served as a stark, albeit faint, reminder of his precarious hold on life. 10 minutes elapsed, then the door creaked open. A physician entered, appearing to be in his late 40s, sporting a salt and pepper beard and eyes etched with weariness. "You must be Samuel." "Yes." "How is he?" The doctor consulted his chart. "He's stable for the moment but remains unconscious. It was a significant myocardial infarction. The strain on his cardiac muscle was substantial." I swallowed hard. "He doesn't drink. He hasn't in decades." The doctor paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "Well, he did that night. When he was brought in, I blinked. "What?" "He was discovered outside a liquor establishment on the west side of town, disoriented, and subsequently collapsed." This revelation defied logic. My father had not consumed a single drop of alcohol since my childhood. He had meticulously collected and disposed of any discarded beer cans found on his property as if they were toxic waste. I frowned. Was anything found on his person? Wallet, phone, keys. Only an old insurance card, the doctor replied. No identification, no personal effects. A chill began to spread through my chest. What about his clothing? Anything unusual? We have no information on that. He was brought in by a passerby. His clothes appeared normal. A work jacket, jeans, dusty. Your father was always dusty. This offered no definitive answers, yet an overwhelming sense of disquiet settled upon me. The doctor continued, "If there are any medications, documents, or personal belongings at his residence, they might assist us in determining the cause of this event." I lowered my head for a brief moment, a profound weariness washing over me. "Yes," I murmured quietly. "I can retrieve those." He nodded. "We will notify you if his condition changes." As the doctor departed, the room seemed to shrink, its confines pressing in on me. I gazed once more at my father, attempting to reconcile the diminished figure before me with the formidable man I had known. The man who could stare down corporate behemoths armed with bulldozers. The man who could decisively dismiss intrusive surveyors with a mere raised eyebrow and a firm tone. The man who adamantly refused to cede even a single acre of Carter land. Now he was incapable of even opening his eyes. I rose slowly, my legs feeling inexplicably heavy. "I'll be back," I promised, though I doubted he could comprehend my words. "Don't you dare go anywhere." I exited the room, paused in the corridor, and leaned against the cool plaster of the wall. This was not merely a cardiac episode, not for him. Something had driven him to the absolute brink. And if I were to uncover the truth, I would have to return to the land he had sworn to protect until his dying breath. I walked out of the hospital and into the late afternoon light, a heavy, orange glow descending slowly across the parking lot. The route to the farm was indelibly etched into my memory, yet I had no premonition that the initial obstacle would be a formidable steel gate guarding my father's property, manned by armed individuals who declared I did not belong. The road leading to my father's farm had always been an unchanging artery, a long, winding dirt path slicing through open fields, bordered by sagging fences, and enveloped in a silence that only exists far from the clamor of civilization. But that evening, as I rounded the final familiar curve, my heart lurched into my throat. The venerable wooden gate, a structure my father had stubbornly refused to repair for 3 decades, was gone. In its stead stood a 12-foot steel barricade, its metallic sheen betraying its recent installation and the pungent aroma of machine oil. Constructed of robust metal beams, reinforced hinges, and adorned with brightly reflective paint, it was an utterly incongruous sight in the middle of this rural expanse. A substantial sign, bolted firmly to its center, proclaimed, "Green Haven, Residential Management, Private Entry, Authorized Personnel Only." They had even added a logo, a diminutive green leaf, a touch of corporate civility utterly at odds with its clandestine purpose. A white Ford Explorer, emblazoned with green stripes and a prominently displayed logo, was parked adjacent to the gate, its presence as jarring as a cheap tattoo. 2 security personnel stood before it, arms folded resolutely, their sunglasses obscuring their eyes despite the sun's descent behind the tree line. The taller of the 2 stepped forward as I brought my vehicle to a halt. He offered no greeting, posed no inquiry, simply stating, "Can I help you, sir?" His tone clearly conveyed a distinct lack of any intention to assist me. "I'm going to the Carter farm," I stated, maintaining an even keel in my voice. "This is my father's property." They exchanged a knowing glance, a subtle smirk, a barely perceptible shake of the head. The shorter guard tapped his radio as if eager to employ it. "Yeah," the taller one conceded. "About that. This land is now under HOA jurisdiction. You're not on our approved entry list." I stared at him, then at the imposing steel barrier, and finally back at him. "I'm not requesting permission," I asserted. "I am stating my destination." The guard, idly chewing gum, stepped forward, shifting his weight in a manner that suggested an intent to intimidate. "Buddy, rules are rules. If you want to enter, you need authorization from Greenhaven, and we don't have you registered as a resident." The appellation "buddy" grated on my nerves, a deliberate provocation. I maintained a neutral expression. "I would like to see the deed transfer," I said, "or any legal documentation demonstrating this property is under HOA jurisdiction since you are enforcing it." The guard blinked, clearly taken aback by the legalistic inquiry. We don't carry that stuff around." "No," I echoed, tilting my head slightly. "Then what exactly are you guarding?" This visibly irritated him. "Listen, counselor," he said, his words slow, deliberate, and pointed. "We know who you are, and we know what you're attempting to do." My jaw tightened. They were prepared. They had been expecting me. I reached forward deliberately and tapped the center console of my Tesla. The vehicle responded with a soft chime. The cameras activated. The tall guard's gaze flickered toward the tiny red recording light, and he subtly straightened his posture. I kept my eyes locked on him. "Just for the record," I stated calmly, "I am the son of the property owner. My father is in the ICU. I am attempting to access his residence to retrieve essential personal medical belongings." "You can try explaining that to the sheriff," he retorted, "but until we receive confirmation from Greenhaven management, you're not gaining passage." "Then contact them," I suggested. "Offices are closed." "How convenient," he quipped, a smirk returning, confident in his perceived advantage. I reclined slowly, my mind racing through strategic options. Legally, I possessed the grounds to contest this. Morally, I yearned to rip that infernal gate from its moorings with my bare hands, but pragmatically, this was not the opportune moment. If I were to breach that gate now, I would be handing them the felony charge they clearly desired. I did not have the deed readily available. I lacked documented proof of ownership. I had not yet established a necessity defense. And these men were deliberately baiting me. Therefore, I offered a cold, controlled smile. "Enjoy this gate," I said, my voice lowered. "I will return with something you cannot obstruct." "What's that?" the gum-chewing guard inquired. "Evidence." Their smirks faltered. I shifted the car into reverse, backing away slowly, never averting my gaze. To them I was in retreat, but in reality I was observing, calculating, meticulously constructing the very case that would ultimately dismantle them. Dust swirled around my tires as I disengaged from the gate. The guards watched my departure, their laughter echoing once more, as if I were the punchline to a joke they had yet to comprehend. Let them laugh. Their actions had merely provided me with more potent ammunition. As I drove away, the last sliver of sunlight caught the steel gate, transforming it into a stark, gleaming line across the road. A barrier, a warning, a challenge, and they remained blissfully unaware of my resolve. I do not concede challenges, not when my father's legacy is at stake, not when our land is concerned. Never. For the first mile after leaving the gate, I remained silent. No curses, no shouts, no forceful impact of my fists on the steering wheel, though a primal urge beckoned me to do so. The Tesla rolled with an almost spectral quietude down the dirt track, its tires whispering over the loose gravel, the final vestiges of sunset fading into the surrounding fields. But within the cabin, an icy chill seemed to permeate the air, more profound than the encroaching night. My hands tightened on the wheel, not from anger, but from a calculated assessment. It was the methodical calculation of an attorney. I replayed every microsecond of that encounter, dissecting it as if presenting testimony on the witness stand. The guard's uncanny familiarity with my profession, counselor, despite my lack of self-introduction. The knowing smirks that accompanied their pronouncements of new management. Their unwavering refusal to present any documentation. The deliberate angle of the surveillance cameras positioned to capture my reaction. And the most telling detail of all, their evident anticipation of my arrival. That singular fact confirmed that something deeply sinister was unfolding. HOAs do not materialize in remote agricultural regions. They do not erect imposing steel gates overnight. They do not deploy private security forces equipped with matching SUVs and proprietary radio protocols. Unless they possessed prior knowledge, no one would dare obstruct them unless they had infiltrated official channels, county offices, zoning boards, land registry records. Unless this was not merely an arbitrary gate, but a calculated annexation. The interior of the vehicle emitted a faint glow from the dashboard lights, casting a pale blue reflection onto the windshield. My own countenance stared back, jaw set, eyes weary. A man fighting to keep his emotions from overriding his logic. I snapped the visor down and retrieved the iPad I always kept at the ready for professional matters. A meticulous city lawyer invariably examines the battlefield before engaging. A tap. Another tap. The Fairview County Property Database began to load, agonizingly slowly. The spinning wheel seemed to mock my impatience. Then, nothing. I refreshed the page. Still nothing. Finally, a message materialized. Online records temporarily unavailable. Last updated 2017. I exhaled a dry, humorless breath. Of course. It was entirely predictable. Fairview County's digital infrastructure likely operated on a server older than the courthouse's air conditioning system, a place where tractors were more technologically advanced than government websites. I switched to the state's land registry. This portal loaded successfully, but a single line on the Carter property page sent a jolt of unease through me. No recent filings available. For the latest changes, contact the county recorder in person. This presented a significant complication. In Chicago, property transfers were electronically registered and accessible within hours. Here, the potential for forged documents to be surreptitiously processed manually and subsequently buried for weeks before discovery was alarmingly high, and the mention of new management by the guard suddenly shifted from blustering bravado to an ominous premonition. If Greenhaven had initiated a fraudulent filing, a spurious annexation, or a counterfeit deed transfer, it might not yet be publicly accessible online. I placed the tablet on the passenger seat and let out a measured exhalation. Well, I murmured to myself, it appears we're resorting to the traditional approach. I adjusted the sun visor back into its proper position, reclaiming both hands for the steering wheel. To gain lawful passage through that barrier, I required 4 specific items. Firstly, documentation proving ownership. Secondly, evidence of an illegitimate intrusion. Thirdly, proof of deception or undue influence. And fourthly, visual confirmation of obstruction. Tesla had already provided me with the 4th item. The vehicle's forward-facing cameras had captured every detail. The gatekeeper's denial of access to a family member, their refusal to retrieve essential medical supplies, their veiled threats, their smirks. Now I needed the remaining components. Yet, beneath the calculated legal strategy, a more profound apprehension gnawed at me. My father wasn't merely confined to a hospital bed. He was exposed. He was utterly alone. And a frail, elderly man without legal counsel at his side is the most susceptible target in the world for a predatory individual armed with official-looking paperwork. The very notion filled me with loathing. I detested the thought that I hadn't arrived sooner. I detested that an entity An HOA, no less, believed they possessed the authority to isolate him, to bar his son, and to seize acreage that had been a part of our lineage for generations. They presumed I was occupied, too busy, too embedded in city life, too disconnected. They were profoundly mistaken. The unpaved track dissolved, giving way to the elevated expanse of the highway stretching before me, a long, dark ribbon winding its way toward town. The Tesla glided forward, the subtle whir of its electric motors a counterpoint to the prevailing quiet. As the familiar illumination of Fairview came into view, the customary landmarks began to materialize. The roadside eatery with its flickering, partially defunct neon sign. The hardware emporium proudly displaying a colossal wooden hammer outside. And, culminating the scene, the courthouse, standing stoically and wearily under the cloak of night. The registrar's office was devoid of light. Closed, as expected. Smaller administrative districts concluded their operations early. This presented no obstacle. I would be present when its doors swung open. I reclined slightly, allowing my eyelids to drift closed for a brief interval. The gentle hum of the battery's cooling system permeated the stillness. This was not a strategic retreat. This was not an admission of defeat. This was a deliberate phase of preparation. If I allowed my actions to be dictated by anger, they would undoubtedly prevail. If I resorted to brute force, they would readily twist it to their advantage. But if I wielded the law, the very instrument I understood more intimately than any of them, I could dismantle their entire operation. My phone vibrated. A notification from Leo. Leo had uncovered more intelligence regarding Greenhaven. They were expanding aggressively, acquiring land at bargain prices. Several complaints had been flagged as suspicious. Call me when you're able. A tightness seized my chest. This was not a random occurrence. This had nothing to do with lawn maintenance protocols or decorative fencing styles. This was a coordinated effort. I opened my eyes, my gaze sweeping across the dim, deserted thoroughfare. You wanted a confrontation, I whispered, and a confrontation you shall have. But not this evening. Tonight I would consolidate my resolve. Tomorrow I would meticulously gather evidence. The genuine conflict would commence the very instant the county office opened its doors, and I intended to enter fully prepared to achieve victory. The following morning, at 7:14 a.m., the courthouse parking area presented an aspect precisely as I recalled it. Asphalt bleached by the sun. A smattering of pickup trucks belonging to local landowners who habitually arrived with the dawn, and a solitary sheriff's patrol car parked askew, its placement suggesting the deputy lacked the inclination to correct it. I remained seated in the Tesla for a few moments, finishing the last lingering sip of the acrid black coffee procured from a gas station, the kind that possesses the flavor of incinerated cardboard but effectively compels one's eyes open. My chest felt constricted, not from apprehension nor from nerves, but from an overwhelming sense of urgency. If the land records had been tampered with, every passing hour held critical significance. The courthouse entrances had not yet been unlocked. A custodian, employing his mop bucket as a prop, propped one of the doors ajar, muttering something about budgetary constraints within the county administration. I stepped inside, proceeded down the hallway that invariably carried the scent of aged paper and recycled air, and halted before the window of the recorder's office. Behind the glass sat Linda Barnes, the same administrative assistant who had occupied that post since my childhood. Her hair was now streaked with silver, but the spectacles suspended from the beaded chain encircling her neck had remained unchanged since the tenure of the Bush administration. She blinked at me, leaned forward, and squinted. "Sam Carter, is that really you?" I managed a weary smile. "Good morning, Linda." She opened the adjacent door and gestured for me to enter. "What brings you back to Fairview? We haven't seen you around here for at least 12 years. "I wish I could say it was a leisurely visit," I replied. "It never is," she responded, motioning for me to follow. I entered the office, greeted by stacks of paper, transparent display cases filled with land plat maps, and an antiquated desktop computer emitting a resonant hum akin to a tractor engine. Linda took her seat and drew the keyboard closer. All right, what is it you require, dear? My father's farm, I stated. The Carter property, Section 12, Township 9. I need the complete file. Deeds, transfers, liens, annexations, anything filed within the past 6 months. She raised an eyebrow. That's quite an extensive request. Is something amiss? The HOA erected a gate and denied me entry. Her jaw went slack. An HOA out there? That's agricultural land. They can't possibly do that. Precisely, I confirmed softly. Linda commenced typing, her keystrokes deliberate and measured. The monitor refreshed, displaying a list of PDF documents and corresponding form identifiers. All right, she announced. Here's the most recent recorded deed transfer. It appears to be from June of 1984, registered under your parents' names. No subsequent modifications. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was ephemeral, for Linda's brow furrowed. That's peculiar. What is it? Well, she continued, there's something else. A supplementary filing. It's not categorized under deeds. It's listed under administrative notices, filed just 5 days ago. She clicked the mouse. The screen presented a scanned document. The image was grainy and askew, as though someone had hastily fed it through the scanner without meticulous attention. Across the top, rendered in bold typeface, was the declaration, Notice of Property Incorporation into Greenhaven Community Association. Effective immediately, authority granted pursuant to annexation provisions. Linda leaned back slowly, her face draining of color. Oh, that's not right. No, it was significantly worse than not right. I stepped closer. The document enumerated parcel numbers, boundary descriptions, and precise legal designations. The phrasing was excessively formal, almost excessively so, reminiscent of someone who had adapted it from a template they hadn't fully comprehended. However, what truly seized my attention was not the verbiage, but the signature. County Surveyor Daniel R. Collins. My breath hitched. Linda, Daniel Collins passed away in 2019. She peered at the screen again. Lord have mercy, he certainly did. A deceased individual had affixed their signature to the annexation document. Someone had evidently assumed no one would conduct a thorough investigation, but they had failed to anticipate the arrival of a son. They had definitively underestimated the possibility that this son was a corporate attorney whose livelihood depended on dissecting fraudulent contracts. I refocused my gaze on the signature line, and another detail struck me with visceral force. The penmanship. Daniel Collins invariably signed with a characteristically looping capital D. The man was reputedly renowned for this flourish. Individuals often jested he was attempting to transcribe musical notations rather than letters. Yet the D in this particular signature was rigid, mechanical, printed rather than cursive, as if meticulously traced from a photocopy. And then there was the timestamp. Linda, the filing date indicates this was submitted at 5:46 p.m. When do you close? 4 o'clock sharp. You know that. So the filing was received after closing hours, implying that someone with internal system access manually introduced it into the registry. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my goodness, Sam. This is fraud. Actual fraud. I nodded. My jaw clenched so tightly it caused discomfort. Please print every page for me, I requested, stamped and certified. She didn't even inquire about the motive. She simply initiated the printing process, a cascade of pages emerging from the machine as if they were rounds of ammunition. As she operated the printer, she whispered, I always suspected something was amiss with that new HOA. They've been acquiring land at an alarming rate and people have been lodging complaints, but this is criminal. I accepted the stack of papers, their weight palpable in my hands, and felt a surge of heat emanating from my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a cold, sharpened sense of purpose. Linda, I said calmly, who processed this document? She hesitated, then accessed another screen. A name materialized. Clerk of Record, J. Mallory. My pulse quickened. Mallory, the county clerk, known for his close ties to developers, his attendance at lobbyist dinners, and whispers of illicit financial gains. This revelation was hardly surprising, yet profoundly insulting. They genuinely believed this maneuver would withstand scrutiny. Linda reached over and gently touched my arm. "Sam, you be careful." I nodded once. "I'm finished being careful." I turned towards the exit, documents clutched in my hand, my adrenaline subsiding into a more frigid, steadier force. Evidence. Tangible, verifiable, career-ending evidence. I now possessed what was necessary. Phase 1 had concluded. Phase 2, breaching that gate, was imminent. I did not drive directly back to the farm. Such a course of action would have been driven by emotion, chaotic, and most detrimentally, strategically unsound. Instead, I maneuvered the Tesla into the modest gravel lot situated behind the county courthouse and dedicated 45 minutes to precisely what I excelled at: constructing a legal case. I arranged the documents Linda had provided across the passenger seat. Each fraudulent page, every forged signature, every illegal annexation. Subsequently, I initiated the recordings from the front-facing camera captured during yesterday's confrontation. The guards obstructing my path, their threats, their refusal to permit access for the retrieval of medical supplies from my father's residence, all meticulously documented in high definition. Excellent. The next phase involved the aspect most individuals seldom witness: the quiet, methodical, and unforgiving execution of legal proceedings. I activated the voice memo application and recorded myself speaking with deliberate clarity and composure, as though I were dictating for a courtroom presentation. Statement for the record: I am returning to Carter Farm to secure personal property, medical documentation, and legal files belonging to my father. A fraudulent gate has been erected on private Carter land without consent. Guards at the location have unlawfully denied access to a family member. Should they obstruct me again, I will pursue lawful remedies to dismantle illegal barriers preventing my access to my father's home. I paused, then added, "This action is a direct response to evidence of forgery, the signatures of deceased officials, post-hours filings, and public record fraud discovered at the county recorder's office. This is not an expression of rage speaking. It is a weaponized instrument of the law." I then saved the recording. The subsequent step involved establishing the necessity of my actions. I activated the dash cam, adjusted its angle to focus on myself, and resumed speaking, not with heightened volume or dramatic inflection, but with the steady, controlled tone of an individual preparing testimony. "I'm returning to the property because I have reason to believe that personal valuables, including my father's medical files and a secure lockbox, are inadequately protected. Should the guards initiate physical contact with my vehicle or attempt to detain me, I will be acting in defense of property and person. I am looking directly into the lens. I do not seek confrontation. I seek access to my family home." I then started the vehicle. The engine purred. The cabin was filled with the soft surge of the air conditioning system, and a peculiar sense of calm washed over me. Not tranquility, but purpose. The journey back to the farm seemed to stretch longer in the daylight. The fields extended endlessly, bathed in golden sunlight. And as the gate finally came into view, the imposing steel intrusion, the counterfeit HOA insignia, the cameras mounted on rudimentary metal poles, my pulse did not accelerate. It decelerated. I brought the Tesla to a halt approximately 15 feet from the gate. The same two guards stood sentinel. One of them, the individual I mentally dubbed Gum Chewer, displayed a wide grin as though he had been anticipating this very moment. "Well, look who's back," he remarked, resting an elbow on the gate. "Didn't quite grasp the memo yesterday, counselor. You're officially barred." I maintained both hands on the steering wheel, speaking at a volume just sufficient for the dashcam to capture. "Under whose directive?" He tapped the HOA emblem affixed to his vest. "Green Haven." A small cold smile touched my lips. "That emblem holds no legal authority, and that annexation document filed last week is a fabrication. I possess certified proof within this vehicle." His grin wavered. The second guard stepped forward, rapping his baton against the side of the gate. "Turn around. This is your final warning." Excellent, I responded. Thank you. They exchanged perplexed glances. Excellent. Confusion indicated predictability. I slowly opened the driver's door, ensuring both hands were visible, and disembarked. The air was warm, and the crunch of gravel under my boots was distinct. I held up a small slip of paper so that the dashcam could clearly view it. My name is Samuel Carter. I am here to access my father's property to retrieve medical documentation under the principle of necessity. This constitutes formal written notice of lawful entry. I placed it on the gate. Now, I continued, maintaining perfect composure, if you deny me access again, you are engaging in criminal obstruction on private property, and should you damage my vehicle or impede my movement, that constitutes assault. Gumchewer rolled his eyes. You are not going through here. No, I replied, stepping back into the Tesla. I'm driving. He slapped the hood of the vehicle. That was the precise moment I required, a clearly recorded act of aggression, not life-threatening, but sufficient to invoke necessity, sufficient to justify the self-help removal of an unlawful obstruction, sufficient for a legal professional who knew precisely which legal contingency to activate. I whispered under my breath, "Thank you." Then I engaged the drive gear. The guard scrambled. What the? Hey! Hey! Too late. The Tesla surged forward. Not at an excessive speed, not recklessly, but with firm, deliberate momentum. The metal gate offered resistance, creaked, and then recoiled backward off its hinges as if it had been awaiting liberation. The sound reverberated across the fields. One guard stumbled to the side, the other dropped his radio and uttered a curse. The Tesla rolled through the opening, smoothly, steadily, inexorably. No trace of anger, no vocalizations of outrage, simply a man reclaiming the ground beneath his feet. I reduced speed once I had crossed the threshold, checked my mirrors, and spoke calmly into the dash cam. Illegal barrier removed from private property. Access secured. No injuries sustained. Proceeding to the residence. And just like that, I had reached my home. Or at least, I was en route to what had once been my home. The gravel track stretched out before me, and a chilling certainty settled in the pit of my stomach. If they had resorted to forging documents, employing guards, and preventing a son from reaching his father, then whatever awaited me at the farmhouse was unlikely to be uncomplicated. I was not driving into a scene of fond reminiscence. I was driving directly into the truth, and I harbored a distinct feeling that the reality I encountered would not be pleasant. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I slowly navigated the extended dirt lane leading toward the farmhouse. For a single breath, just one, I allowed myself to entertain the possibility that I was mistaken, that perhaps the HOA was merely posturing, that everything within the house would appear precisely as my father had left it. That hope evaporated the moment I observed the porch. The welcome mat was askew. My father, a Marine, a man who once ironed his socks because order was his bulwark against chaos, would never have left that mat out of place. Its twisted, off-center position felt as though chaos had already infiltrated the interior. I ascended the steps with measured deliberation, my gaze sweeping the porch. Fresh abrasions marred the brass doorknob, and minuscule metal shavings lay scattered on the wooden planks. Someone had been here recently, and not with any degree of discretion. The door yielded with the slightest pressure. Unlocked. My father had weathered droughts, wildfires, break-ins, and a tornado that had stripped away half the roof. Yet he meticulously locked his door every single night. The air within was stale and disquieting, unnervingly silent, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I entered the living room with the ingrained instinct of a fraud investigator entering a compromised workspace. Visual discrepancies became immediately apparent. My father's recliner had been displaced by several inches. The remote control lay on the floor. Boot scuffs, originating from two distinct pairs of footwear, one heavier, one lighter, tracked through the accumulated dust. This was not a random burglary. This was a targeted search. I moved into the kitchen, and the knot in my chest tightened perceptibly. The silverware drawer was ajar. Cabinets were rummaged through. The ceramic jar where my father kept emergency cash lay shattered across the floor. A boot print, fresh, was visible across one of the shards. My breath hitched once, a solitary exhalation, before I regained control. They had been inside, within my father's domicile, operating under the guise of that fabricated HOA jurisdiction. I proceeded down the hallway towards my father's bedroom. I harbored a strong reluctance to look inside, but I knew I had to. The room had been ransacked. Drawers had been forcibly removed. The closet had been emptied. Photo albums were strewn about. Even the corner of the carpet had been pried up. They had discovered the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. It was empty. They had absconded with its contents, my mother's wedding ring, and the key to the lockbox. I stood motionless for a considerable duration, allowing the surge of anger to subside, much like a seasoned lawyer brings a complex case to its meticulous conclusion. Slowly, precisely, with unwavering focus. Then a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, but it was neither a law enforcement officer nor an intruder. It was Jack. His broad shoulders filled the doorway. He wore the same sun-weathered denim jacket, his beard was gray, and his eyes held a weariness that mirrored the landscape. "Sam," he said quietly, "I figured you'd end up here." I exhaled a slow breath. "Jack, what happened?" He did not respond immediately. He scratched his cheek, his gaze sweeping across the room as if he were reluctant to articulate the words aloud. Then he sighed. "A couple of nights ago," he stated, his voice gravelly, "I observed a box truck, white, no markings, drive up the driveway around midnight." My jaw clenched involuntarily. "Whose truck?" "Greenhaven's." He spat the name as if it were a noxious substance. "They had 2 guards with them. One of them was the tall fellow from the gate. They went inside your daddy's house and dragged out the safe as if it were refuse collection day." A wave of nausea washed over me. "Are you absolutely certain?" Jack nodded once, a slow, weighty affirmation. "I shouted at them. They told me to mind my own employment or they'd have me removed from land that doesn't even belong to them. One of them snapped a photograph of me as if he were documenting evidence." A warmth bloomed behind my eyes. Not sorrow, but a chilling, calculated rage. "They didn't even attempt to conceal their actions," Jack added. "It felt as though they intended for you to witness it." I inhaled through my nose, exhaled through my teeth. "Where is Bruno?" Jack's expression shifted. The anger dissolved into something more profoundly sorrowful. "He was here when the trucks arrived," Jack said softly. "He barked, chased them, and he hasn't returned." For an instant the room swam before my eyes. Bruno had been my father's constant companion for a decade. That dog would have pursued a phantom if he believed it posed a threat to the farm. "Sam, I'm so sorry." I nodded, my jaw locked so tightly it ached. Jack stepped aside as I moved past him, back toward the front porch. At the entryway, something on the floor caught my eye. A folded slip of paper beneath an overturned pile of mail. I picked it up, a printed notice. Greenhaven Community Association Security Compliance Inspection. Completed. Completed. They affixed a formal HOA inspection label to what was essentially a home invasion. Of course they did. I stared at the paper for a long, cold moment before sliding it into my pocket. Jack watched me intently. "Are you all right, son?" "No," I replied. "But I am thinking clearly. And that, Jack, is far more dangerous for them." Jack gave a slight nod. "That's the Samuel I remember." I inhaled deeply and surveyed the yard, the tire tracks near the barn, the scuff marks on the porch, the faint aroma of diesel fuel still clinging to the air. Every detail was a thread I could pull later. I walked down the steps toward the driveway. Jack followed a few paces behind. "Listen," he said. "Do you want me to stay, help you clean up, do anything?" "I need time to think," I stated, "and I need to be alone for a few minutes." Jack hesitated. He clearly did not wish to depart. His loyalty to my father, his devotion to this land, was unwavering, but he eventually nodded. "I'll be in the barn," he said. "Just give a holler." He walked away slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. I stood alone in the driveway, gazing across the fields that my father had dedicated his entire life to protecting, and then I heard it. The sound of gravel, heavy tires, moving swiftly. I turned sharply. A county sheriff's cruiser rounded the bend, kicking up dust in its wake. Another vehicle followed, a second cruiser. The lights were flashing, but there was no audible siren. My stomach tightened. "Of course," I muttered. "Right on schedule." The first patrol car screeched to a halt, and two officers emerged swiftly, their hands already poised near their sidearms. The primary officer, a burly man with a ruddy complexion, seemed to be gasping for air as if he had sprinted from the vehicle before it had even fully stopped. "Samuel Carter," he demanded gruffly. I maintained a steady tone. "Yes, sir. I'm here. You're under arrest. Keep your hands where I can see them." Jack was halfway out of the barn shouting, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Stay back, Jack," I shouted back. "Don't get involved." He stopped abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. I raised my hands slowly, palms outward, projecting an air of calm and compliance, every movement deliberate, as if I were in a courtroom undergoing rigorous questioning. "On what grounds am I being detained?" I inquired. The officer scoffed. "Trespassing, unlawful entry, vandalism of private property, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, your vehicle." My jaw tightened. There it was. The exact charges Karen Blake had orchestrated. I chose not to protest or raise my voice. To argue now would only paint me as a volatile son, returning to stir up trouble. I had witnessed too many clients jeopardize their defense by speaking out at the wrong moment. Therefore, I offered the response a seasoned legal professional would. "I do not consent to any search or interrogation. I will cooperate fully." The officer roughly snapped handcuffs onto my wrists, tightening the metal just a fraction more than necessary. Typical small-town intimidation tactics. "Sure you will," he sneered, his breath carrying the scent of cheap coffee and an even cheaper ego. "You think you can just crash through a lawful HOA security barrier and get away with it? Not a chance." I let out a long, controlled exhale. "That gate belonged to my father." "Save it," he snapped. "You can make your case to the judge." He then propelled me into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, I saw Jack advancing aggressively, fury blazing in his eyes. "This isn't right," he yelled. "That's his house. You've got the wrong man." Two officers restrained him. I shook my head at Jack, a silent plea. "Not now. Let me handle this." The door then slammed shut. We drove away from the property, the house receding in the rearview mirror like a fading photograph. The interior of the patrol car reeked of vinyl, stale sweat, and a palpable sense of desperation. Yet I felt no despair. I felt a quiet patience. The officers conversed in hushed tones in the front, confident I couldn't overhear them. "That HOA lady said he'd put up a fight." "Yeah, and she was right. He rammed the gate. Could have killed someone. She said he'd probably try to claim the land was his." "Well, it isn't. The paperwork says otherwise." Ah, there it was. They had been thoroughly briefed, even coached. Karen clearly had influence with the sheriff, perhaps even his superiors. Connections, local politics, the usual recipe for corruption. I leaned my head back against the seat, my gaze fixed on the dusty partition separating us. This was precisely their objective. Me, cuffed, humiliated, and powerless. However, they had overlooked a crucial detail. Legal professionals don't panic. They construct strategies. The county jail carried the distinct aroma of bleach and dampness. They confiscated my belt, my watch, my phone, everything except my simmering anger and my professional training. The lead officer shoved me into a holding cell. "Just relax, counselor," he taunted. "The court will see you in the morning." The door clanged shut. I sat on the metal bench, elbows on my knees, breathing deeply. This was, by all accounts, the nadir, narratively, emotionally, strategically, and that made it the most advantageous position, for now I was entitled to one thing: a single phone call. 5 minutes later, the officer returned, a tablet in hand, a smug expression plastered across his face. "You get one," he announced. "Make it count." I rose, composed, serene. "Oh," I replied, lifting my chin ever so slightly. "Don't you worry." My lawyerly composure was razor sharp. "I certainly intend to." He opened the cell door. I stepped out, walked to the payphone, picked up the receiver, and dialed a number I had never erased. The line rang once, then twice. "This is Agent Leo Turner." A sigh of relief escaped me. "Leo," I said, my voice low but firm. "It's Sam. I need your help." The holding cell was so cold my fingertips stung. I sat on the metal bench, elbows on my knees, allowing the silence to engulf me. This was not a moment of despair, but of calculated waiting. I was anticipating the officer's return so I could make my single phone call. Then I heard footsteps. 2 sets, measured and confident. Not the sheriff's, not Leo's. No. These were the footsteps of someone accustomed to having the world bend to her will. The officer paused at the bars. "You have," he hesitated, glancing back, "a visitor." A visitor at midnight in a rural county jail. There was only one person arrogant enough to make an appearance at this hour. The cell door swung open. She entered with the practiced elegance of someone arriving at a spa, not a county holding facility. Karen Blake, impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled, a subtle perfume that seemed entirely out of place amidst the rusted bars and the scent of mildew. She clasped her hands in front of her and offered a smile that resembled a serpent adorned with lipstick. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice smooth as polished wood, "my condolences on your current predicament." I remained seated, refusing to acknowledge her presence. My hands remained clasped as I fixed my gaze on her, like a witness I was preparing to dismantle. She tilted her head. "Oh, come now. No witty rejoinders for a corporate attorney. How disappointing." I allowed the silence to linger. Karen moved closer, her heels clicking against the concrete floor, and held up a clear plastic tablet case. Within it lay a stack of legal documents. "Fairview County has officially recognized Greenhaven's acquisition of the Carter property," she declared, as if reading a triumphant headline. "Your father signed the transfer. It's a done deal." I exhaled softly through my nose. "Forgery," I stated plainly. Karen let out a soft, practiced laugh. "Oh, Samuel, always so theatrical." She slid one document partially out of the case, revealing the signature line. "Recognize that?" I didn't even glance at it. "You forged it." Her smile faltered, just barely. "Good. I found the vulnerability." "You drove through a newly installed HOA security gate," she continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Nearly killed 2 of my security personnel, trespassed into a home you no longer own, and you're here lecturing me on forgery." My jaw tightened. She moved even closer, crouching down to meet my eyes, like a prosecutor leaning over a defeated defendant. "You're finished," she whispered. "You're aggressive, unstable, a menace. Tomorrow, the judge will gladly remand you while we finalize the transfer." She produced another document, this one already marked with a neon tab on the signature line. "This is your sole opportunity to avoid felony charges," she stated. "Sign the waiver, admit fault, agree to stay off Greenhaven property, and I will recommend leniency." I slowly raised my gaze. "Leniency," I repeated. "It's a generous offer," she purred. "For criminals, perhaps." Her expression flickered again, so I leaned in. "You broke into my father's home. You stole his safe. You shattered his life. And you orchestrated this arrest to keep me out of the way." She blinked, a sharp, involuntary flinch. Bullseye, but she recovered with remarkable speed. "You have no proof," she declared. I smiled, the first genuine smile since my return. Her lip twitched. "You should reconsider your options," she hissed. "In 12 hours, you'll be before a judge who trusts me far more than some big city lawyer. You'll be booked, charged, and held, and by the time you're released—" Her grin was venomous. "Your father's land will be nothing but a distant memory." I met her gaze until the silence became unbearable. Then I calmly said, "You should have done your research." She squinted. "Meaning?" I stood slowly, deliberately, maintaining my composure. Meaning, this little scheme of yours isn't the first fraudulent acquisition I've encountered. Meaning, I interned at the Department of Justice's Fraud Prevention Division. Meaning, I can detect a forged notary stamp from 50 feet away. I took a step closer. And Karen, if you are not out of this building in 10 seconds, you will witness the most significant miscalculation of your career. She opened her mouth to retort, but the front door of the sheriff's office burst open. Voices, firm and authoritative, announced federal authority. Heavy, synchronized footsteps marched down the hallway. Karen turned, confusion etched on her face. What? The deputy outside the cell stiffened, as if facing an imminent reckoning. Then, a figure appeared in the doorway. A dark suit, a badge hanging from a lanyard, eyes sharp enough to pierce stone. Leo Turner, and he was clearly displeased. 2 FBI agents flanked him, their windbreakers emblazoned with Federal Bureau of Investigation. Leo surveyed the scene, his gaze falling upon the deputy, then Karen, and finally the open cell door. His eyes landed on me. Sam. Just my name, spoken with a firmness that was grounding, like a reassuring hand on a shoulder during a storm. Karen blinked rapidly. Who are you? Leo ignored her, addressing the deputy. Unlock the cell, he commanded. The deputy stammered. But the sheriff said... Leo stepped forward, his voice chilling. I said, unlock the cell. Keys jangled, bars slid open. I stepped out. Leo offered no smile. He didn't need to. He then turned to Karen. Mrs. Blake, he said, his voice laced with a professionalism that could disarm a man. My name is Special Agent Leonard Turner, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Karen froze, her complexion draining of color. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Leo continued, We have been observing Greenhaven Community Association for over a year, and your presence here tonight, attempting to coerce a detainee into signing documents, provides extremely valuable evidence. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Thank you for your cooperation. Karen's entire body tensed. I don't know what you're implying. Leo took a step closer, his presence not threatening, but undeniably authoritative. I'm implying, he said softly, that your little empire is about to crumble. He then turned to me. Let's go, Sam. I walked past Karen without a backward glance. As I reached the door, Leo leaned in slightly and whispered, By the way, you were right. I raised an eyebrow. About what? His mouth tightened. They did break into your father's house. We have the surveillance timestamps. My jaw clenched. And we're just getting started. The drive from the county jail to the Greenhaven headquarters felt like navigating towards a tempest I had anticipated my entire life. Leo drove, not a transport officer, but Leo himself. That alone signaled the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a routine operation. It was personal. For him, for me, and for my father. The sky burned a deep copper as the sun dipped below the hills. Miles of open farmland slipped past the windows, but within the SUV, a heavy silence prevailed. Finally, Leo spoke, his eyes still fixed on the road. You understand? He asked. I don't bring civilians to federal raids. I'm aware, I replied. But given what they took from your father, he paused, and the fact that you are legally the only person who can identify several items, an exception applies. I nodded. Thank you. Leo didn't offer a, you're welcome. He was all business. Don't touch anything, he added. I exhaled slowly. No promises. Greenhaven's main office stood at the edge of town, a facade of faux stone designed to project an air of officialdom, the kind of place meant to deceive those unfamiliar with true authority. Tonight the parking lot was sparsely populated. 3 sedans, an HOA Explorer, and a lone pickup truck. The atmosphere was unnervingly quiet, too still. 3 unmarked SUVs were already positioned, their lights off. Agents were concealed behind planters and pillars, observing their sectors. As Leo exited the vehicle, the lead agent approached. Warrants confirmed. Door team in position. Leo nodded. Execute. The air crackled with anticipation. Boom. The battering ram struck the front door, shattering glass and buckling metal. Boom! A second impact, and the frame collapsed inward. Agents stormed the building, their voices echoing like thunder. FBI, federal warrant, hands where we can see them. Do not touch the computers. I followed Leo inside. The lobby, with its artificial fountain and glossy brochures, was a flimsy front for the pandemonium erupting beyond. Employees froze. Papers scattered. A coffee mug hit the tile floor and rolled erratically. One woman attempted to shut her laptop, but an agent intercepted her wrist. "Ma'am, that's evidence." We advanced deeper into the building. Agents swept through offices, collecting hard drives, tagging filing cabinets, and photographing desks. "Server room locked," someone announced. "Breach it," Leo commanded. A steel punch splintered the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a bank of humming machinery. Labels indicated parcel integration logs, transfer records, and AE B325 inspection database. Every word hinted at conspiracy. Then a voice called out, "Agent Turner, you'll want to see this." We followed the sound to a small side room and stopped. A steel safe, scratched, dented, and pried open with a crowbar. A familiar dent on the corner from when my father dropped it in 2006. "My father's safe." Leo crouched down. "Is this yours?" "Yes," I whispered. Inside, only emptiness, with scattered remnants of torn fabric and dust. Everything my father had kept. Land maps, deed backups, my mother's ring. All gone. My throat tightened. Before I could speak, an agent called from the hallway, "Agent Turner, something else here." We followed to a corner office, the largest in the building. Karen Blake's office. It resembled less an HOA workspace and more the private study of an aspiring politician. Leather chairs, sculpted lamps, awards that seemed utterly meaningless. And there, on her desk, illuminated by a warm desk lamp, sat a small velvet pouch. My breath caught in my chest. My hands moved involuntarily. I opened the pouch. Inside lay my mother's wedding ring. I recognized every detail, the worn edges, the faint scratch on the inside of the band, the engraving my father had commissioned in 1984. My chest felt like it was caving in. "She kept it," I murmured. "Not as evidence. She kept it for herself." Leo's jaw tightened. "That's not just theft," he said softly. "That's cruelty." I closed my fist around the ring, feeling its weight, the weight of memories, of grief, of my father's devotion. I carefully slipped it into my pocket. My voice emerged low and controlled. "She's not walking away from this." Leo placed a hand on my shoulder. "She won't." We stepped back into the hallway, only to hear shouting emanating from the conference room. A woman's voice, familiar and sharp as broken glass. Karen Blake. We followed the commotion. She was cornered between two agents, lunging and struggling like a cornered animal. "You have no right! This is private property! Get your hands off!" Her designer suit remained impeccable, but her composure had shattered. Leo stepped forward. "Mrs. Blake!" She spun toward him, rage contorting her features. "You!" she shrieked. "You did this!" "No," Leo corrected, his voice flat. "You did this." She trembled, her teeth clenched. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "We understand plenty," Leo said. "You forged a notary stamp. You falsified deed transfers. You broke into the Carter home. You stole his safe and forced it open in your office." Her mouth froze, a crack appearing in her facade. Leo continued, "And we have footage of your guards escorting a box truck onto the Carter property the night your father was hospitalized." Her face turned ashen. Then a smirk. Small, venomous, terrifyingly calm. "You think any of that matters?" she whispered. "You think anyone cares about some old man on a dying farm? You think you can stop what's coming?" Leo stepped forward with deliberate slowness, the very room seeming to hold its breath. "Mrs. Blake," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "you will not speak of that man again." Her smirk faltered. Leo nodded to the nearest agent. Arrest her. Handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. Karen erupted. This is an outrage. I will destroy every one of you. I know people. I will own this town. Agents dragged her toward the hallway. As she passed, Leo spoke loudly and clearly, ensuring everyone could hear. No, Mrs. Blake, your career is over. Several employees lowered their gazes. One quietly nodded. Another let out a relieved sigh. Karen was shoved into the hallway, screaming about lawsuits against the federal government. Leo turned to me. You okay? I looked at the empty safe being wheeled out, the crushed velvet pouch in my pocket, the office of a woman who believed she could usurp my family's legacy. No, I said, but we're close. Leo nodded. We're not done until every piece of this is exposed. I took a breath. This wasn't about the land. No, Leo agreed. It wasn't. Then he delivered the devastating blow. Sam, we found emails linking Greenhaven to a developer planning a multi-county land seizure corridor. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Meaning? I whispered. Leo met my gaze directly. Meaning your father wasn't the first target, and he wasn't supposed to survive. The hallway fell silent. My fist tightened around the velvet pouch, and for the first time, my anger wasn't a roar. It was sharp, precise, the calculated anger of a lawyer, the kind that never misses its mark. I had imagined the courthouse would feel like a victory. It did not. When the clamor subsided and Karen Blake was led away in cuffs, railing about appeals and conspiracies, there was not a single cheer, only the profound silence of justice finally being rendered. 17 years. That was the sentence. 17 years for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Dad stood beside me, stiff in his patched blazer, his breathing shallow, as if each inhale might be his last. We walked out into the afternoon sun, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Justice can staunch the bleeding, but healing takes far longer. The road leading home looked exactly as it always had: dust, fence lines, open sky. Yet something had changed. The steel HOA gate was gone, dismantled that very morning by order of the sheriff's office. The ground where it had stood was merely torn earth and broken bolts. The place felt lighter, as if the land itself had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. Jack was waiting by the barn when we pulled in, his hat pulled low, his boots caked with mud as usual. He clapped my father on the shoulder with a rough affection that spoke volumes of love. "Welcome home, boss," he said. Then he looked at me. "Both of you." Before I could respond, a familiar bark echoed across the yard. Bruno, old, limping, a patch of fur missing from where they had hidden him, but alive. He trotted out from behind the feed shed, his tail thumping against my father's leg like a rhythmic drum. Dad knelt, burying his face in the dog's neck. "He thought he lost you, old boy," Jack said quietly. Truth was, we all thought we lost each other. I walked the fields that evening. I used to believe land was merely dirt, toil, and obligation, but standing there, watching the cottonwoods sway like spectral figures, I realized something my father had understood his entire life. The land remembers. It remembers every struggle, every sacrifice, every generation that refuses to relinquish its hold. Later that night, Dad sat at the kitchen table, his gaze fixed on the wood grain. "I pushed you too hard," he said, his voice rough. "Didn't know how to talk to you. Drove you away from your own home. That's not something a Carter should ever do." I sat down opposite him. I reached into my pocket and placed Mom's ring on the table. "You didn't lose everything," I said softly. "We still have this. We still have us." His fingers trembled as he touched the gold band, and for the first time since Mom passed, I saw tears welling in his eyes. "You came back," he whispered. "That's what saved this place. Not the FBI, not the court. You." A month later, construction commenced on my new house, situated on the western edge of the property. Close enough, yet with enough distance to prevent a relapse into old patterns. Dad would stop by every morning, coffee in hand, offering unsolicited advice. "You're a lawyer," he'd say, kicking a wall stud. "But even a lawyer should know wood warps if you don't stack it properly." I'd roll my eyes, but I listened, for that was his way of saying, "I love you." A few weeks later, I returned to the spot where the steel gate had once stood. The scar on the earth was still fresh. I knelt, pressed my fingers into the soil, and planted a sunflower seed. Then another, and another, Mom's favorite. By spring, a vibrant line of them stood tall and bright gold, a defiant living wall that no corrupt HOA could ever breach. People often believe stories like this conclude in courtrooms, but for me, it ended right there in that field, standing barefoot in the soil my family had bled for. Beside the man who taught me what it truly means to be a Carter, for the first time in a long time, I was home.